was speaking on Sunday, thousands were again taking to the streets of Jerusalem and other Israeli cities, calling for his resignation and the release of all hostages in Gaza. Now, the protests are still ongoing. The Israeli Prime Minister met with the family of one of the hostages on Sunday. The father of 19-year-old Nama Levy told Israel's army radio that they left the meeting, quote, disturbed and with no good news. Nadav Salzberger from the Change Generation movement is leading the Tel Aviv protests, and he told the UK's Telegraph newspaper on Sunday that the protests over the weekend were, quote, an eruption of underground currents that have reached.
They want the hostages to be released and they want the war to continue to be fair. Yeah, I mean, some do for sure. Chad, is he in Australia for real? Do I look like I'm still in Australia? That was April Fool's, baby. You got baited.
The boiling point. And he joins us now live from Jerusalem. Great to see you, Nadav. Thank you so much for taking the time today. Look, over the weekend, we saw an eruption of anti-government protests across many parts of Israel. But your specific movement is calling for something very specific. I want you to take me through what you and your members want.
Thank you. So first of all, I want to start by mentioning the 134 hostages still held captive in Gaza, including women, elderly, and children. We are fighting and praying for their immediate release. We are a movement called the Change Generation. After October 7th, we realized that Netanyahu and his coalition have no intent of taking responsibility over the worst disaster in Israel's history. So we have taken to the streets and we formed a young movement comprised of young Israelis, reservists, and students with the goal of replacing the current government with a responsible government, one deserving of the Israeli people. That is our goal.
So you're calling for elections and a change in government, essentially?
Yes. Yeah, we're calling for election.
Over and above, of course, importantly, and the release of hostages, which is important. But you've also said something interesting, and just reading up about what your movement is about, that Netanyahu hasn't prioritized hostages. So what do you think he has prioritized instead?
I think that Netanyahu has prioritized the survival, his own political survival, and the survival of his coalition. I think that while many people, including politicians, are doing their best to try and bring back the hostages, it simply isn't enough. I think that we, as the young generation who grew up under Netanyahu, have witnessed rotten leadership, and it's time for us to step up and demand better leadership for all Israelis.
So Netanyahu has rejected calls for elections, saying that it's going to dismantle the talks that are currently underway, specifically for hostage release. We also know that Hamas has said that all hostages will be released if there's a sustained ceasefire. So what are your views on the current negotiations and, importantly, on a ceasefire?
We believe that the war against Hamas is a just war. We believe that Hamas is a threat not only to Israelis, but also to Palestinians, and that Israel must triumph over Hamas. That is why we are not calling for a ceasefire. We believe that the war needs to be fought until the end, but we also believe that we should prioritize bringing back the hostages, even if it means pausing the same way we paused a couple of months ago to bring back hostages. And we also believe that declaring a schedule for elections a couple of months from now will not hurt or damage neither the war efforts or the efforts to bring back the hostages, but rather allow the current government to act without being dependent on politics or its own survival.
Yeah, I mean, and of course, families of hostages, we've heard just harrowing stories of the uncertainty that they're experiencing. I want to turn now to the UN Security Council resolution that within it said that famine is setting in Gaza right now. From what we've been seeing and Netanyahu's policies essentially of not allowing enough aid into Gaza has gotten a lot of criticism from aid organizations. They're describing dire realities. From your perspective, how are you viewing this? And does this worry you and your members, importantly?
Again, I think we are worried for our future in Israel, for the future of the region. I think that what we have seen yesterday in Jerusalem are hundreds of thousands of patriots going to the streets and demanding a better future. I think we are done waiting for politicians to make things.
Damn, dude. Really? That's it? Like, no, like that's what you got for the aid stuff? Give us a little bit, man. Come on. Give us a little bit to be like, yeah, it's really fucked up. Because like there's a liberal Zionist line here. Here, I'll tell it to you. Okay. Here's what you are supposed to say. Okay. Which already is like bad. What you're supposed to do is say, I think that in order for Israeli security, for Israel's security interests in the region, Palestinians have to be able to live freely. Okay? Palestinians have to be able to live freely, and obviously disrupting aid is not only bad because it, makes us look bad in the eyes of the Western world, but it also is bad because it's starving at the Palestinians and making them more radical to, Israel's existence in the region. That is the liberal Zionist line. But I do think that many liberal Zionists have gone beyond that, especially ones in Israel. They want an even more one guy. No, what you're describing is a line that basically doesn't exist anymore in Israel. There's like 11 people that are concerned with Palestinian livelihood. They will inevitably turn to that direction. I was right in the past, and I'm right on this as well. Okay? Liberal Zionism being the way forward for Israel. They will have to re-maneuver back to liberal Zionism, either by force or I don't know. I mean, they are going to have to do that. There's no way that they can continue being as genocidal and continue demanding support from the Western world.
CNN is also learning that senior US and Israeli officials will meet virtually today to discuss Israel's proposed ground offensive in Rafah. A US official says the two sides are still working towards an in-person meeting on the issue. Face-to-face talks were abruptly called off last week by the Israeli Prime Minister after Washington refused to block a UN resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Benjamin Netanyahu.
What is this? The Israeli Labor Party is not a thing, okay? There is no real Labor Party in Israel. And also, the Israeli Labor Party is not even remotely liberal on the position of Zionism or even on the position of Palestinian existence. The president of Israel is a Labor Party member who literally has said some of the most unhinged shit. Okay? They're not even popular. They're nothing. The president of Israel is a Labor Party member who has famously also said genocidal things in the aftermath of October 7. And not only has he said genocidal things, he also has said other shit like talking about miscegenation among Jews and non-Jews and how that's a bad thing. And that was way before October 7. So these guys are like, wait, what? No, this guy was being serious. Zionism is a catch-all. Zionism as a catch-all means that Israel must exist as a Jewish majority demographic ethno-state. Okay? That's it. Which is why it doesn't matter if you're liberal. It's like saying I'm a liberal fascist. I thought he was fucking baiting me. Turns out he's not baiting me at all. He was being serious. The people who had opposition to Zionism in the early development, or the opposition to the way that Israel has developed itself in the early days of Israel, like Einstein, would be considered anti-Zionist by today's standards for their criticisms, even if they originally considered themselves to be Zionist. Okay? There are plenty of early Zionists who then, King Henry IV, thank you for the 20 community gift of subs, by the way. I'm going to run the 3-minute ad break now. There are plenty of people who originally called themselves Zionists who now abhor that designation And the reason why they think it's abhorrent is because they recognize that there is no way to do Zionism without settler colonialism, settler colonial occupation, and the maintenance of a demographic Jewish majority ethno-state. There are ways to be Zionist in Israel just the way you can be socialist and critical of the U.S. I have not seen what this way is, the way you're describing it. Okay? I mean, I am an American. I'm an American citizen. I love America. I love the promise of America. But what do I am incredibly critical of America's imperialism. I'm incredibly critical of America's hyper-capitalist policies and how it kills Americans on a regular basis. The difference is I'm very open about my criticisms and that, like, if I was in Israel, if I was an Israeli citizen, my counterparts in Israel are people who call themselves anti-Zionists. Okay? They do not call themselves liberal Zionists. They call themselves anti-Zionists. They understand that Zionism is about the maintenance of a Jewish demographic majority ethno-state. This means This means that there's a constant struggle amongst those who want to exist inside of Israel or those who live under the colonial occupation that will never get full-blown rights. So I'm not caught up on this distinction. I don't care about the distinction because Zionism is fascist inherently. If you want there to be a ethno-state, if you want there to be an ethno-state, a Jewish ethno-state in Israel, that is an inherently fascist idea. The only difference is it's just like the in-group is Jewish rather than white, so it doesn't translate in the same way to Americans. They don't really fully get it. Zionism doesn't call for a Jewish majority, but the right of Jews to live peacefully in Israel. Yeah, except in practice, that is about maintaining a Jewish ethno-state. In practice, you're using the conservative definition. No, I'm using the realistic definition. I'm using what has happened. That's it. That is a inevitability. People say, oh, it's about like Jews living safely in Israel, except it started off with the Nakba and a settler colonial project, and it has never stopped. It has only continued to get more and more reactionary as time has moved on. You know what I mean? So liberals in America might try to desperately change the narrative and say like, no, that's not what this is about. That's not what this is about. If Zionism is fascist and the U.S. supports them to the fucking hilt, what does that make us? Fascist. I would never say that America's imperialist endeavors are not fascist. They are. The fuck? Yes, American imperialism is disgusting. It's deadly. It's devastating. But like, we're talking about a literal apartheid state that is desperately trying to maintain its apartheid regime while simultaneously engaging in an ethnic cleansing campaign. I think like it's like having a conversation with like liberal Germans or something. Like social democrats in Germany in like 1938 being like, no, you don't understand. Like there are still plenty of people who don't like the National Socialists. We just don't really have any other way to, stop this Lebensraum policies of the National Socialist Party. Unfortunately, I think you're wrong on the Israeli moving towards the American version of liberal Zionism. No one inside Israel understands why the rest of the world hates them, and they think they're the normal ones. You're right on everything else you said, though. Yeah, no, this will take time for them to reposition, and America will continue doing PR in that regard. Let's continue.
Says U.S. pressure will not stop an Israeli ground operation in Rafah.
We will go into Rafah and eliminate Hamas battalions there for one simple reason. There is no victory without entering Rafah, and there is no victory without eliminating Hamas.
Here's another take that I want to show you. Matthew Noah Smith says, I'm Jewish, so I'm disposed to love fellow Jews in Israel, especially my family and friends that live there, and to love the family and friends of people who are a part of my Jewish community here. Then I see the poll results about Israeli attitudes towards the suffering of Gazans, and I'm disgusted. This is very important to understand. I know Giannis was on Majority Report today. He's going to be on my stream soon too. To what extent should Israel take into consideration the suffering of the civilian population in Gaza when planning the continuation of the fighting there? October 23rd, 83.5% of Israeli Jews said to a fairly small extent or not at all. December 23rd, it was 81%. There has been a 3% shift only since October 23rd, 3.5%. 80% of Israeli Jews still believe to a fairly small extent or not at all that Israel should take into consideration the suffering of the civilian population in Gaza. Okay? What's wild here also is that 23% of Arab Palestinians living in Israel said that they care to a fairly small extent or not at all. I don't understand how the fuck that works, but what do you think of the Samson option exposed by Shimon Peres and the plan of Israel destroying everything with their nukes? Yeah, I mean, that's you can't keep that in consideration. Even the Jewish left in Israel is split. 40% of the Jewish left says not to take the suffering of Palestinians into consideration when planning the war. The inhumanity of this opposition. Babies are starving, and nearly 50% of the left thinks this doesn't merit consideration. Suppose the U.S. tried to prevent famine and drought. Oh, yeah, you're right. Elent is correct. It might be like the Druze, maybe. Suppose the U.S. tried to prevent famine in Gaza by making a half-assed effort to save the lives of starving children and babies whose crimes was to be born in the wrong place in the wrong time. Guess what? Most Israelis think that weakens Israel's bargaining power. President Biden has announced that the United States intends to construct a jetty in Gaza to facilitate a supply of humanitarian aid. In your opinion, how will such a step affect Israel's bargaining power vis-a-vis Hamas? On the Israeli left, 43% think it's strengthening Israel's bargaining power. 31% say it's weakening Israel's bargaining power. On the center, 54% say it's weakening Israel's bargaining power. And on the right, 67.5% think it's weakening Israel's bargaining power. Says you're either a Jew or you're Arab. Even though there are Arab Jews are classified as Jewish under Israel, under the Israeli standards. Okay? When Israel says someone is an Arab in their polling, they're talking about Christians and Muslims. Arab Christians and Arab Muslims are considered Arab. Arab Jews are considered Jewish because it is a Jewish ethno-state.